So, hey Les, can you hear me? Hey Les, how are you doing? Thanks for joining us for this new chat with the Mindful Beekeeper episode. And like I was telling people today, we're going to talk about how you got started into natural beekeeping, treatment for beekeeping, and why. And I see you on the Zoom, so I'll let you introduce all that, and then people can ask their questions below in the chat or in the comments below, and then we'll answer them after you've talked about your philosophy on natural beekeeping. Mm-hmm. Oh, by the way, Les, hang on, let me unmute you, and you don't have your video on the Zoom, so just remember to do that as well. There we go. We're good.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Yeah, and so when I was a little kid, when I was born, and this kind of gets a long story, but when I was born, my grandfather came to live with us from Philadelphia, and he was an organic gardener. And this was back in the early 60s, maybe even the late 50s. So I'm getting old, right? But back then that was considered really weird. But I remember my mom had a bit of a garden and he had a garden. My mom's garden was powdered with white dust. My mom would tell me, don't go in there because that's bad for you. And my grandpa's garden, I was always welcome. And he was an organic gardener and there was never any issue about poison on his plants. So I loved my grandma's garden. I spent many hours a day helping him pick tomato hornworms off and just play in his garden. Learned a lot about the bugs and the creatures in the garden. Had a good time. And now there was a lot we didn't know. For instance, he used carbon tetrachloride to clean his tools. We now know that that's highly carcinogenic and we shouldn't have done that. We ate lots of bologna sandwiches. Now we know that those are, full of nitrates and they're not good for you, and etc. But back then, that was the most we knew. And then I started keeping bees, and I thought everybody kind of in the beekeeping world would be mindful of the idea that you don't want to kill bees with pesticides. When one year I had about 20 hives on a bee yard. I was about 18 years old. And I had 20 hives in a bee yard on a reservation near where I lived there in New Mexico. And that bee yard had made a lot of honey. They had made alfalfa honey, which was kind of dark. I had, in those days, Langstroth hives. The way I ran Langstroth was 3 mediums for my brood box, and then however mediums for my supers. And the bees had made a lot of alfalfa honey. And so the supers were pretty full, 3 and 4 supers on every hive, 20 hives, so 7 boxes high, and a lot of honey that I was going to sell for a fair amount of money. And I was real excited. I had a little pickup, an old beat up pickup. I drive into the bee yard with what supers I had left. And I was, thinking, boy, this is going to be a lot of work, but the extractor's all set up. I'm ready. I get out of the truck and I'm suddenly confronted by the fact that I'd been there a few days before to check on them, and it was just roaring with bees, literally like buzzing with bees. Hundreds of thousands of bees just roaring in and out of the hives. And when I opened the door, it was deadly silent. And I thought, what the heck? And I looked, and there was piles about a foot deep of dead bees in front of all the hives. And then I thought, holy crap, what happened here? I didn't even bother lighting my smoker, putting on my bee veil, popped the lids on a few of the hives. There were a few dead bees up in the top supers, all full of capped honey. And there was smears all around in there where they had apparently thrown up or pooped before they died inside the beehive, and everything was dead. I drove to the local governor's office, whom I knew, Andy Lariano, the governor of the tribe of Sandia, and I told him what happened. And I wanted at the time to cry, grab a rifle and go shoot some. You know, I was very upset. And I told him what happened, and he said, oh, there's a farmer who was a Vietnam vet that they leased land to, and he thinks he might have been doing something. And I knew the farmer. I knew him pretty well. And I also knew that he was he could be very dangerous. He could shoot me. He was not entirely an easygoing person, and he was often drunk. So I drove up to his house, his trailer on the reservation. He wasn't a tribal member, but they let him stay on the reservation. And I knocked on his door, and he greeted me somewhat huskily right away. And I said, did you spray your corn? And then he knew what I was about, and he just cussed me out. He was 40 something, I was 18. I didn't know what to do. I just left. Now what was I going to do with those beehives and all that honey? There was a few $1,000s worth of honey, but who wants it? I wouldn't eat it. I couldn't sell it to anybody. What would I do with the boxes? Could I clean them out and put bees back in them? I didn't trust any of it. I wound up bringing in some wood and making a big bonfire and burning honey, everything. That was thousands of dollars. Now, as a beekeeper, we don't need pesticides. You know, pesticides do us huge amounts of damage. I later got on the phone to some other beekeepers in other states, and they were being hammered by this particular pesticide. This pesticide was called PenCap-M, and it finally got banned. But it took about 6 years of lots and lots of beekeepers all over the United States banding together in our national organizations and demanding that it be banned, and demanding and demanding. And it was not easy, because the company that was selling it was making a lot of money, and they were donating to political campaigns. And it was really hard to get it banned through EPA. Now that has become impossible. Right now, chlorpyrifos and neonicotinoids are doing the same thing, but we can't get them banned. And as a matter of fact, right now, there's not even a hint of banning them. The beekeepers are all calling for them to be banned, but the EPA under Scott Pruitt is not going to ban anything. They've only been releasing more and more pesticides. So as a beekeeper, I see the very negative effect of pesticides. I believe that a lot of bees all over the world and in cities today are adversely affected by neonicotinoids, and that we don't know it. We aren't measuring it, but very low doses of neonicotinoids do brain damage to bees. So it could be that your bees and my bees have been slightly or grossly affected by the background neonicotinoid infestation that we have in the world today. Now, as beekeepers, we are negatively impacted by pesticides. Can we lead the way and show that there is a way to keep bees without using pesticides ourselves? What sense does it make for a beekeeper to use pesticides and then demand that farmers stop using them? If we can't find a way around them, above them, beyond them, then we shouldn't expect anybody else to either. They need them as badly as we do, but we don't need them. I set out that year when I was 18, which I don't know, it's a long time ago, about 50 something years ago. I started trying to find out what can we do about antibiotics. How can we keep bees and not put a single toxic chemical into the beehive? And it led me on a path that actually turned out not to be, I mean, there were times when it was very challenging, but mostly it was a lot of fun. I found that I could breed bees that were disease resistant. We didn't have mites in those days. So I could breed bees that were disease resistant. And I wouldn't have to worry about the bee, the pesticides or the cost of it. And the bees were absolutely healthy. So I've become very adamantly passionate about not using pesticides. If I get fire ants in my kitchen, occasionally happens, I'll give some borax and powdered sugar and feed them, and it's taken care of. There's a great group called Beyond Pesticides, and they've been in business for a long time. They have a good staff, and they can help you. You can look up any problem where you're tempted to go get the raid or some pesticide, and look it up there, and they'll show you a way to help with that problem in a non-toxic fashion. We don't need pesticides.
Uh-oh.
Got an invasion.
We have little ones coming in.
My granddaughter that's not a year old yet, but her mom got her. She's very attached to me. But anyway, because what do we need to pass it? Like I have a granddaughter who's 11 months old. She's a cute, bright little girl. When we do brain damage to bees with neonicotinoids, we may do a little bit of background brain damage to ourselves, to our kids. We know that chlorpyrifos does brain damage to kids, and yet the EPA won't ban it here. It's been banned everywhere else, but the EPA here won't ban it. We need pesticides banned. We need to be doing research in how to find alternatives to pesticides, and there's very hopeful research being done. You know, the University of California at Santa Cruz did a study where they found that growing a cover crop of flowers under your almond trees raises a whole bunch of little wasps that eat a pest of almonds. And it works better than the spray. The spray didn't keep the peach tree maggot, it's called, down as well as the flowers. And flowers are beautiful, and they made honey. So not only is it safer for everybody, it was slightly cheaper, and it was good for the bees. It's not bad for the bees. But right now, for instance, if you want to get a pesticide approved, you have to get a permit from EPA. EPA will make you do a test. It's called the LD50 to determine the lethal dose for 50% of the bees. It takes a few hours or a day to set it up and do it and record all the data. So, and who does it? The company does it. EPA doesn't do the test. They don't hire any independent contractor. The company tests its own product. And then they decide if it's okay. And would they like to do a test that could take a year to determine if their product does brain damage to bees? Absolutely not. They're never going to do that. They're never going to approve of that. Well, who allows the company to do that? The EPA. Who allows the EPA to ignore the health of bees? Basically, it boils down to the legislature, because in the end, the EPA is responsible to the administration. And who funds political campaigns? Not very many beekeepers, but big companies like Syngenta, Bayer, we used to be Monsanto, they fund political campaigns. So they get the legislation they want to sell their products. We can still make money. We can make lots of money keeping bees and raising food and raising it in a healthy way and raising wasps. We could go into the wasp raising business and learn how to do that. it's kind of a seek and you shall find. We have sought toxic solutions. We found them. Turns out they're toxic. What a surprise. So now we could seek life affirming solutions and we would find them as well. I could go on, but I don't want to take up too much time.
Well, and then, you know, that you bring up some good points. Basically, the bulk of the research is funded by companies that have a vested interest in the results that are going to be found. In effect, it's making the results biased, in my opinion, right? There's a reason why you don't have a lot of research on treatment-free beekeeping or natural beekeeping, but you have a lot on the effects of the treatments, the various options for treatments that companies are trying to sell beekeepers.
Right, and we wind up now with a corporate academic sponsorship. So the corporations go to University of California and they say, we'll set up a building on campus, we'll pay a lot of rent, we'll fund half of the research if you fund the other half, but when we own the results, whatever we come up with, we own all the results. And so that means that they allow the papers to be published or not, and they decide what you're going to test. And you're always going to test a product that they can sell. They're not going to be interested in funding something that's free or natural or, you know, something that they don't have for sale. So the corporations have taken over our university's research. It's very difficult to fund research. And if you want to read about somebody, actually you can read it in Beyond Pesticides. Look up Tyrone. He's University of California at Berkeley. I can't remember his last name right now. I'll look it up and I'll have to pass it on later. His first name is Tyrone. He's a professor at the University of California at Berkeley. And he did a long-term study on the effect of atrazine, which is used as a herbicide on frogs in the water, like in the Mississippi River where they use the atrazine. It winds up in fairly high doses in the Mississippi water. He found that it made the male frogs turn into female frogs. It completely changed their anatomy. And the male and female frogs aren't as different as male and female people in some ways. You know, that's, but in it, because it's external fertilization and everything. But he, Syngenta helped him do his research. They paid for his research and they wouldn't let him publish it because they owned it. And then when he wanted to keep doing the research, they threatened the University of California to withdraw funding from anything they do if they didn't shut him up, basically. So that's where profit making supersedes the health of the environment or the health of basically our children in the future, because long term this is really, you know, we're poisoning ourselves. And Europe has already banned a lot of these pesticides, and much of the world has. We just need to get them banned here.
There's another point I think this brings as well, is that the fact that, you know, those studies, even if they were objective in trying to look into natural ways to take care of the pests and pathogens that affect our beehives, there's also the problem that the honeybee colony is a superorganism, and it's made out of really I mean, it's functioning by very complex rules and mechanisms, a lot of which we don't understand. And that means that those researchers are trying to isolate. First of all, they often get bees that are poor, not good quality, that have been treated, and they get what they can because it's kind of expensive for them to get good bees. And then they will try experiments, but in isolation from the superorganism. They'll burn some brood on a frame. I mean, with the whatever the cold stuff, I forget what it's called.
Liquid nitrogen.
Yes, the liquid nitrogen, and they will count, you know, workers doing such and such, or adult kills, things that are observable. So not only are they in a completely out of context, out of the superorganism mechanisms, but also they have very small samples, and it's just they can't see everything that's happening, like the sublethal effects that LD50 is only looking, for example, at actual mortality rates, and it's not looking at sublethal effects such as, you know, like you were talking about earlier. Bees can, you know, neurologically be affected negatively and then end up wandering around and not being able to return to the colony, and then all of a sudden that colony is getting weaker and not as able to thrive. So that's another point I think that can be mentioned about that.
Right, and the test for that, like James Nye in the University of California at San Diego proved that honeybees at very low doses of neonicotinoids can't taste the sweetness of nectar. So they lose their foraging hunger. And so a hive that doesn't have bees that can taste nectar is a doomed hive. They're not going to die tomorrow, but in a few weeks they're going to decline badly, and in a month they'll probably be dead. But you would have to run a test on hives for a month or two to find out that result. But he found that out. Another researcher found out that honeybees know which flowers to visit when. They're very good at that. That's their life, right? They really know how to play that ball game. But when you give them very low doses of neonicotinoids, they just visit all the flowers all the time. So they go back to the dandelion flower and it's empty. Oh, it's empty. Well, no doubt. They should have known that, but they're not. They've got dementia, and that hive is not going to thrive. That hive is doomed.
So yeah, it's basically not a visible effect, but it's negatively impacting the entire colony because it's highly inefficient, and that's decreasing their return on foraging, you know, on bringing resources back to the hive. Actually, I've got Tara Higgins 123. She says, I moved here from Germany several years ago, and I was surprised how people want to use pesticides or just chemicals so easily in their everyday life. She's saddened by that. And
yeah.
I'm going to go on a segue here. She had a question about, she's a first year beekeeper, and she has a lot of worker bees in her top bar hive and very little to no drones. And she's got new comb filled with nectar. And she was just wondering if that was normal.
Where, do we know where she lives?
She's in Dallas-Fort Worth area.
Oh, good, okay. That is pretty normal. We seem to have had a great fall lately, that they've put away some honey, just fresh. The fact that they aren't raising drones is good because they should be shutting down for the winter fairly soon. If they were raising drones, I'd be worried about fall swarms. The fact that they're not raising drones says they're going to take advantage of this last honey and then hunker down for the winter. And that's a sign that I would prefer that. I hate to make divides this time of the year. If they get ready to swarm, that would push me into thinking of making divides. But I've got to divide a hive that's got to almost be ready for winter as soon as I make it. They can't get ready for winter. It's already around the corner. So that's perfect. Fair amount of workers because they are on a honey flow, but they should be shutting down pretty soon, and there shouldn't be many drones.
And I was going to say, if there are any left by the time the weather starts cooling off or they realize the resources are tapering off, they're going to end up kicking whatever drones are left in the hives and let them out in the cold, literally, to die.
Yeah, good.
To come back to, you were talking about that person, that researcher at the University of California, Berkeley. That's Tyrone Hayes, Tyrone Hayes.
Yeah, I heard him talk at a meeting and talked to him. They literally, one time, he got up and spoke at a pesticide rally in San Francisco. And at the end of the rally, a man walked up to him and said, you know, while you're at these rallies inspiring everybody, your wife and kids are home alone on Miller Street and such. And then the guy turned and walked away real fast. And Tyrone ran outside and called his wife right away, and they were fine. but he felt like that was a direct threat from somebody to tell him, shut up and don't go to these meetings because we know where your kids live and they're home alone right now. That really, really scared him, but it made him so angry that it didn't stop him. There's some very brave people in this, you know. I had a lot of respect for him. He was a cool guy, great speaker too.
That's cool. So that's kind of a little bit of why you got started into natural beekeeping, and I'm going to remind everybody both on Instagram and on the Zoom meeting, if they have questions in Zoom, you can type them. Thank you, Stan Gore. It's nice to see you here. I'm actually going to read his question right away, might as well while it's fresh. And same thing for the Instagram people. Don't forget to ask your beekeeping related questions in the comments below. Stan is asking, wild bees that swarm in fall, what is the latest month they have a shot making it through winter on an average winter? And he's in Texas as well.
Yeah, and I don't really know. I know the bees can get by on very little honey. In this, we don't have much of a winter. There's often rosemary blooming through the winter, so they can get by on very little. But my experience tells me it's already getting really late. We're soon to be in November, and it's got to start tapering off. So I would worry about trying to make, like picking up a swarm right now. I would probably have to feed it a fair amount, and who knows if they can get enough pollen, but I'd still pick it up because what the heck, they're tough bees around here, and maybe they'll make it. But in New Mexico, I would have said the end of September, well, even the end of August, it's too late to make any divides or try to catch swarms. Any swarms that came that late, like after August, would no way make it. But here in Texas, particularly South Texas, maybe if they swarm, I'd try them. I'm opposed to just constantly feeding. If you have to feed the bees, if you will, badly adapted enough that they swarm when there's no chance of survival, maybe they shouldn't survive, and they'll have to get with the program. So yeah, I hope there's not too many swarms now. I'm really hoping. So far, I just went and checked on some bees I have in Austin, and they were pretty full of honey. They'd actually gotten a little bit cross-combed because I wasn't expecting any growth, but they'd built up quite a bit of honey. And fortunately, they also didn't show any sign of drones, and they didn't show any signs of swarming. So I think they're just packing away the honey and getting ready for winter. I have a feeling we're going to have kind of a warm, dry winter, which is not a good. It would be nice to get a little bit of rain once in a while, but it just seems like we're in a kind of a dried out spell here, and we could have a long, dry winter. We'll see what the spring brings.
So if you were to, I'm going to ask a follow-up question to Stan's question, which is really good. If you were to find a swarm, what would you do to help it out survive?
Yeah, I would take, yeah, I would have to go and try to export some honey from some of my stronger hives. And here I like to leave them with at least 9 combs, but I'll go down to, I've seen them overwinter on 5, so they can overwinter on very little here. So if I had a bunch of them with 9, I might take 1 and leave them with 8 from 4 or so, and have to give them honey from other bees. But at some point, I don't want to damage my other bees in order to try to get them to be able to survive. So it becomes, as we get later in the season, I'd rather just not worry about it. Catch them, maybe feed them a little bit. If they live, great. If they die, well, I tried.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because I don't want to take too much for my bees.
That's true. A question from Instagram from Wood Valley Bees. Hi, I'm in the San Antonio area. I had a swarm on a trash can that I caught and placed in a box. I saw the queen and it's about 4 hands full large only. I've never overwintered a small swarm. I have no drowned comb, but I have hives with brood I can steal from, or should I combine?
This late in the year, and you're in a cold, where are you in? The cold?
In the San Antonio area,
Oh,
near
okay.
you. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah. No, I guess I would try it. I would try to take a little bit of comb. San Antonio, I've never been through a winter in San Antonio, but it's noticeably warmer than Austin. And I bet there's some flowers throughout the year. Sometimes, Phoenix, the main honey flow is in December. That's when their citrus blooms, and your biggest dearth is June and July, when it's just so hot that you can't make any honey. So I would try it in San Antonio, try to get them through.
And if you have a large colony that can give, if you have several large colonies that can give, 1 or 2 combs each, then you can combine those and have 4, 5 combs at least for that swarm, and maybe they'll catch up,
Right, exactly.
But as long as the donor colonies are large enough that they can spare 1 or 2 combs.
Right.
I've got a question from Ken Thompson, Northern Iowa. So it's a little bit cooler. First year beekeeper running with multiple top bar hives. Yay! Wondering how to move the cluster if they settle in the middle of the hive, since that seems to be where the most brood is. Been reading about clusters getting stuck at one end of the top bar hive and starving.
I'm not familiar with that as a problem so much. The cluster generally will establish itself somewhere and then begin to contract either on one side or both, and deposit a little bit of pollen honey as it contracting for a while. And then I would never break apart the cluster. I would probably, well, first of all, so how many combs? Yeah, in New Mexico, I was leaving them 12 combs with honey mostly, and a lot of the back combs in the cluster towards the front. Sometimes I would get it reversed. They'd put the honey in the front, and I have the cluster in the what I call the back. But that didn't matter because they'd still have the way to eat their way through the honey. And I understand where you are. It could be that at some point you may want to, because if they eat going one direction, they can't get back to the other direction. I'm about to be invaded one more time.
She loves you. She can't stand being away from you.
No, she didn't open the door. Okay, so, but the Russians kept them in long boxes with honey on both sides. They tended to keep the cluster in the middle, and the cluster seemed to manage. So, and the other thing is to throw a bunch of hay, put it on a gunny sack, bunch of hay on top of it, or stuff a gunny sack full of hay, and throw that over your top bars, kind of give them some insulation, in particular on top of the top bars. And then somewhat on the north or the non-entrance side, you could do something with that. But mostly if you just throw something over the top bars, because you're going to get pretty cold there. And that could help them out a little bit.
So that's good. Yeah, giving them a little bit more insulation. I mean, we don't get as cold as you guys do in Northern Iowa, but at the same time, we have that one comb usually by the entrance as the bees put there, usually as insulation themselves, then the brood's nest, and then all the honey after that. And so it's usually not even in the middle of the hive, and we have no problems, even with some really cold days. Sometimes in the, I forget my Celsius versus Fahrenheit, but like in the 25 or something like that. Sometimes it gets really cold. Probably not as cold as in northern Iowa, but they seem to do fine. And that insulation on top is great because a lot of the heat is lost above, which is kind of what the problem with the Langstroth is sometimes, because you have a chimney effect, especially in the winter, where that heat rises and it's getting lost and creates problems. So I got Honey Tasmania has joined us on Instagram. That's awesome. We get people from, you know, Australia and New Zealand and all this stuff. So that's really cool. Thank you for joining us. If you have questions, ask them in the comments below. I'm going to ask a question from the Zoom. Central Texas, New Braunfels, first-year beekeeper is Victoria. She had 3 younger developing docile hives and recently added a 4th one made up of feral bees. Now the temperament of the other 3 hives has changed. Would this be attributed to this 4th hive or the humid weather that's making all of us cranky? Would I possibly need to move the 4th feral hive further away from the other 3?
I don't think it's the addition of the other hive. Bees often show a differential from spring to fall. They start off in the spring real easy going, and they get really cranky in the fall. And so, and right now we're getting into robbing quite a bit. Robbing can get going pretty fast. So that limits the amount of time you want to expose any honey. Like you want to open the hive and go through them. But if you're harvesting this last bit of honey, you want to do it as quickly and as seamlessly as possible, drip as little as possible on the buckets or on the hives, or you're going to find that if you use your hive tool to cut the honey off the comb, they're going to be landing all over your hive tool. And that, when they get to robbing, they really get cranky. So I don't think it's the addition of the 4th hive. I think that it's just the time of the year and the fact that they're starting to rob. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wouldn't worry about requeening. If they turn out to be cranky next year in the spring, that's a problem. Really cranky is no fun, and then you want to requeen.
So consistently a cranky is an issue, right? If you, right. I mean, I like to tell the people I talk to that, 3 strikes and you're out. So if you're cranky every single 3 times, I come in a row to inspect you and I've, eliminated weather and disturbances and all that stuff, and you're still cranky 3 times in a row, then I'm just gonna want to requeen, because it's, like you said, it's no fun. But other than that, it's probably just annoyances and weather and lack of resources, and everybody's kind of cranky sometimes, right?
And I've noticed bees have moods, and I've come back and they've been in a much better mood. And I hope you're not having trouble with your smoker. If you can use smoke, that really helps. But there are some bees that you shouldn't keep too close to your house, in particular, because they can get so mean that they become somewhat dangerous. So, if they get really consistently bad, you could get help to requeen them, because it can be not any fun for anybody.
An interesting question from Michael Francis. How much pollen do you like to see going into winter in your hives?
Yeah, so I don't really measure the pollen. Right now, for instance, if you look at the bees, they're covered with orange pollen right here in San Antonio area, and some bright yellow pollen. It looks to be goldenrod and other things. So I have never really worried too much about pollen. Nectar seems to be the main bottleneck in terms of survival, or honey. Mm-hmm. So I don't, I assume that there's quite a variety of pollen available in this Central Texas area, and that I see whole combs sometimes. Like often there's the brood nest, and then the comb at the edge of the brood nest is got half of it's full of pollen, and that means it's protein for a long time there. So I wouldn't worry about pollen personally. I have never fed pollen substitutes.
Yeah. Stan Gore is asking, I find that if I feed honey frames this time of the year, Stan is on Langs, to help feed bees from late cutouts, forced absconds or water meters, etc., rescued removals, things like that, I get robbing. If I feed sugar water, I don't see much robbing. Any idea why that is? I'd rather feed honey.
Well, I suspect the honey smells strong and good to the bees. So the smell of the honey probably inspires them to like, oh, I really want to get in there and get some of that. And the smell of sugar, unless you were to scent it and associate it, they may not hardly notice it. That's my only guess. I appreciate your asking that question, and I could have to think about it a little bit, but offhand, I'd say it's probably the smell.
Mm-hmm. I want to welcome Kuli Kuli, who's back on the Instagram feed. He's from Australia, so it's really early in the morning, Friday, and he joins us regularly every Friday before going to work. So it's nice to see you. Thanks for joining us. Do you have questions, guys? In the meantime, my hive smelled like stinky socks last week, and we know why that is, right, Les?
You mean because of the goldenrod, or the?
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, that reminds, so goldenrod makes a very strong flavored, very dark, kind of stinky honey. Some people really like it, so, you know, it's probably full of minerals. So you could say it's extra medicinal. I don't know. It reminds me, in New Mexico, there's a flower that blooms really late in the year that they call burro brush. And it makes absolutely terrible honey. It makes sometimes quite a bit of it. And it smells like, everybody told me it smells like urine. Like they'd say it's like going out in the alley behind the bar in Juarez.
Or French subway station.
You know, could be. I've never been there. It just smelled terrible. And even the beeswax smelled really strong, like old urine. And then I remember, so I had 5 or 6 5-gallon buckets of it, and I let people taste it and they'd go, ooh, you know. So, well, I definitely don't want that one. And I wouldn't blame them, you know. And then 2 different women tasted it and said, oh, it tastes like honeysuckle. I said, how much do you want? I got a 5-gallon bucket cheap. I didn't know what to do with it. I could wind up maybe feeding it to the bees again. It was really terrible.
So I did hear, like you said, that the goldenrod honey has actually, in general, the fall honeys have higher medicinal properties, and also that they taste more, like the goldenrod honey has a more caramelly, a little stronger. It goes well with coffee or something a little bit stronger because it is pungent.
Right. Well, years ago, the English found out that a lot of things that make darker honey dark are extra minerals like iron and magnesium. So that's probably a good thing. We tend to say dark honey is lower quality, but that's looking at it from the point of view of, you know, pure white sugar and
White bread.
And now we know that dark bread is better and unrefined sugar is a little slower and a little healthier. Therefore, dark honey is probably wiser for us too.
Not that the spring honey doesn't taste good, but still.
Yeah.
Well,
it's good to keep it separate. I love to have the 2 separate colors, and then you can take your pick depending on your mood or what you're putting it with, you know.
That's true. And Kuli Kuli from Australia is saying different eucalyptus make darker honey. So that's interesting as well. We're going to need to have a trip over there at some point when we can all travel again and go around the world and just kind of try the different types of honeys, the local honeys. So I had tested when I went on the Hive Jive with JJ John Swan. I tested, that was the episode where he had, I forget her name, but she was from Australia, and she had Jerry Bombra honey or something like that. And it was really good. It was really good.
Yeah. I'd love to go to Australia. I've also always wanted to go to Tasmania. So
there you go.
Yeah.
So you guys have other questions we can help you with. Your beekeeping related questions, ask below in the comments or in the chat window. Yeah, he does quickly mention Manuka honey that everybody knows about now, right? And
Right.
yeah. Somebody, oh, Victoria said, thank you for sharing the YouTube why honey works better than antibiotics. If you guys want a really entertaining video, we posted it on the Hayes County Beekeepers Association and on the Be Mindful Facebook page. But look it up on YouTube, why honey works better than antibiotics. It's a very entertaining video, and it's got a lot of things that in it that are very informative, but it's a well done, if slightly a little bit, he's British, so he's using words that, you know, people go oh, here, but I don't have a problem with it, and it was fun, so I would highly recommend that video.
Okay.
Yeah, it talks about antibacterial, antifungal, and all that good stuff, how the Egyptians were using it, and how they were mollifying bodies. What, it's not funny, but they were using that to basically base the bodies that were passed and just kind of keep them. And then they were, well, I'm not going to tell you everything, just this one bit. They were using the honey 100 years later for medicinal properties.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry. Michael Francis is asking tips on keeping small hive beetles at a tolerable amount.
Well, I don't do anything for the small hive beetle personally, but there's no problem with, I see those Swiffer, the pads that the beetles get tangled up in. A few bees get tangled up in them too, but they do work pretty well. Keeping wax or like chunks of comb, if you're in a tupper hive, I used to lay them down. Now I never do that because beetles get under them and the bees can't. So trying to give the beetle as few places to hide as possible. But there's going to be beetles, and the bees didn't used to do anything about them, and now they're doing quite a bit to get rid of the beetles. So I don't worry about the beetles very much. What I have seen is a hive that swarmed, and maybe swarmed twice, and contracted quite a bit off of its comb. And then the beetle larvae got started. And once they start sliming the comb, the bees abscond. It smells so bad, I guess, that they just don't want to stay.
Mm-hmm. So what I usually tell is right along these lines, and if you have a colony that's covering all your combs, then typically they take care of the small hive beetles, and having a few, 10, 20 even, is not going to be a problem for your colony. The 1/8 mesh that people use for screen bottom boards and things like that, that lets the smaller hive beetles come in. So it's kind of an open door invitation for them, because they can also smell the colony better. And it has the additional effect of preventing the bees from being able to control more tightly their environments, whether it be hygrometric, the humidity inside the hive, or the temperatures. And so it's stressful on the colony, and stress is something that the small hive beetles can smell, and that it attracts them to colonies that are in difficulty. So if you control that, if you make sure that you have equipment that doesn't have a lot of cracks and crevices for them to enter or to hide into, and then if really you're starting to have an issue, you can, Stan Gore is the one who gave me that tip. You can put under the hive, and every time I cannot remember which one it is, but I think it's crushed, not granite, the other one, crushed limestone, very fine one, not the rock looking ones, but kind of like almost a sandy texture. And then it cuts up the small hive beetle larvae when they exit the colonies and try to go and pupate down in the ground, because that's part of their life cycle. So it's basically a mechanical way to interrupt their life cycle, and it's part of the strategies of integrated pest management that you can use. So that's another idea.
Because they don't travel, they just come out of the hive, the larvae, and fall to the ground and dig into the ground.
Right.
The ground cuts them up,
Mhm.
They don't live.
Yeah, they're yeah, they catch them. The other thing is that don't keep entrances that are too wide open, especially in Langstroth. There's a tendency to have those big long openings, and the bees prefer the smaller openings, just enough opening for between couple 3 bees up to enough for the traffic to not be blocked, depending on the size of the colony. But if you open wide, you're kind of it's not as good for the bees, basically, usually.
Yeah, that's good.
So does anybody else have questions for us? We've got 5 more minutes on our chat with the mindful beekeepers. We started today with Les talking about how and why he got into natural beekeeping. And that was a very interesting little chat there when we started at 5 p.m. Anybody else has questions?
I might just add that I hope that we as beekeepers can lead the way to finding non-toxic solutions to all of our pest problems,
Mm-hmm.
and that the almond growers are getting close in some ways because they recognize that they have to help us keep our bees alive or they can't grow their almonds.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of fruit growers are starting to look into more holistic or natural ways to raise their fruit. And so we're not trying to go back to the Stone Age. We're going forward into a new, better biological age where we learn how to still grow plenty of food and just not use a lot of poison.
And the other thing, it is part of the integrated pest management to start that's usually represented with a pyramid. And at the bottom, you have first the cultural intervention that you need to use to prevent pests and pathogens for taking a hold on your colonies, meaning good genetics or well-mated queens and well-fed queens when they were young. Basically, healthy, productive queens from genetics that are local and survivor stock, preferably, because then they're going to be better adapted to your local cycles of forage and weather, which I say all the time. I know I'm repeating myself. But at the same time, and then the next level is probably more mechanical interventions. We were talking about reducing the entrances and the granite, the crushed limestone under the hive and all that good stuff. And the chemical intervention is kept for the very top of the pyramid, whether it's being synthetic chemical treatments or organic acids like oxalic acid and essential oils, formic acid. Essential oils are not an acid, but all the acids, the hop beta acids and formic acid and oxalic acid, and then the essential oils, all that are still chemical if considered organic chemical treatments, but that's best kept for last resort. But even then, you need to ask yourselves, are we trying to prop up colonies that are not able to fend for themselves? And what is the ultimate goal? For them to reproduce so that we can spread those genetics around? Or do we want bees that are naturally more resilient and able to fend for themselves without us adding any foreign substances to the colonies?
Right, yeah. That's a good point. And I might add that I've gone to learn and teach beekeeping in Jamaica, where they have very little money and they can't afford all these organic acids and pesticides that we can order here. There's no way to even get them either easily unless somebody brings them in for you or something. So they've learned to do without them out of necessity, and they're doing very well without them. Mm-hmm. So that only shows that in some ways having all these toxic options is no privilege. It kind of makes us dumb. You know, it makes us keep thinking we have to use them. And you'll go to bee clubs where they will tell you, if you don't use them, you're irresponsible.
Or you will kill your bees.
Right. Even in San Francisco, I was just talking to a young man in the Bay Area that said their meeting is just a bunch of people yelling and arguing at each other about why you have to treat, or you're a terrible beekeeper because your hives are going to become mite bombs. And we have to make sure we're not mite bombs. We have to make sure we don't have a lot of mites. If we do, we shouldn't do something. we should intervene in some way. But like, I don't do anything about mites, and I don't hardly see any mites. They're a very minimal problem. So, but a lot of people get very angry when I say that, because they say, well, you're just encouraging people not to treat. Yeah, I am encouraging you not to treat.
Mm-hmm.
I'm encouraging you not to treat in a competent way, where you notice, oh, this hive is getting a lot of mites. There's a little bit of cedar bark smoke, and requeen with a better queen, and eventually I'll get to where I don't need to do this, because the bees all over the world are showing that they can live with varroa mite.
Mm-hmm. Kuli was mentioning regarding broad acre farming. He was mentioning companion planting.
Right.
And Tara's got another last question. So in the spring, do I need to get a new queen? I have one full hive. Could I split it?
Yeah, you could split it, and you could, depending on when your spring honey flow comes in. That to me determines. I'd be tempted to try to make a divide rather than buy a queen, because I like to get daughters from my own bees instead of keep importing bees. But if you want to try a queen, so then that would reverse. Normally I put the old queen in the new location and let the old location raise a new queen. But if you're going to make a divide with a bought queen, then I would put the bought queen in the new location and just take some bees from the old, take plenty of bees so that they don't swarm from the old location. Given that the field bees are going to drift back to the old location, and so just put in some extra.
I lost my Instagram feed. So one last question, actually two last questions. Were you speaking of diatomaceous earth to spread under the hive? No, it was actually, and if I remember well, no, I don't want to do this. Cancel. That was Stan's advice is crushed limestone, fine limestone. And then Mike is saying, what's the one thing you'd like new beekeepers to go away with?
To learn to get, to open your beehives as often as you can without bothering them too much. You don't need to take the hive all apart. Just look in the back and maybe see a little bit of brood. If you see a little bit of brood, everything's fine. But to spend time with your bees, because they will slowly, between you and them, you'll learn their cycles, learn how to tell what's on the combs you didn't see. So spend time with them and trust that there are a lot of bees that can take care of themselves. A lot of bees are, but it does wind up being on the brood pattern. If the queen is laying a good brood pattern, that's kind of the heart and soul of a healthy colony.
Okay, well, thank you, Les, with that. And I apologize to your Instagram followers. Instagram shut down the live feed on us. So we're not gonna ask you to join back because we're at the end of this talk. We appreciate everybody following us on both Instagram and on Zoom and asking us questions. Please come back next week and prepare some questions for us. We'll announce our new theme. Les is gonna talk about a subject that's dear to him every single week to kickstart the videos and the chat. And then we'll open up for questions either related to that topic or your own very own questions you have related to beekeeping, and we'd love to help you out. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us. We're delighted to have you. Tell everyone you know to come and join us as well. We want to be able to help more beekeepers, and we'll keep doing this every week. And I'm going to let Les close this. I really appreciate him being available, making himself available every week to help you guys out and to talk about natural beekeeping. So thank you, Les. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Nathalie. I'll just say that I would try to, as much as possible, make these as upbeat as possible. I talked to a young man recently, and he said you know, I'm tired of hearing about global warming. I know I'm worried about it and all that, and all the plastic in the ocean and all this. It's like it makes me feel hopeless. I want inspiration. So I hope that we can offer inspiration here and not yet more doom and gloom. Bees are doing pretty well on their own. We need to do our share to help them, but it's a lot of fun actually. And bees kind of make life make sense for me. So I hope you join us. Thank you. And with that, I'll say goodbye.
Thank you.
Week Thursday at 5 p.m. Thank you so much, guys. Thanks for joining us. Bye.